You're here for season 7 of the Whole Horse Podcast, now at 110 episodes and counting. I'm your host, Alexa Linton, coming to you from Vancouver Island in Canada. I can't wait to continue to share thought-provoking, edge-pushing, geeky, and often challenging conversations with horse professionals from all areas of our industry who are working to make horses' lives better. This season, you can look forward to more on the specifics of creating enriching, healthy horse spaces, an area I'm particularly passionate about. I'm so excited that you're here listening in, meeting great horsey humans, and hopefully learning a new thing or two about horses and yourself. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. You're here for the Whole Horse Podcast, and I am joined today by someone I've wanted to talk to for a while, someone I've experienced his bodywork method through colleagues of mine, and I've been really curious about the origin story and other things about this method and about Jim. So I'm joined by Jim Masterson and really wanted to welcome you today, Jim, to the podcast.
Oh, thanks. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. So many of you will know that Jim created the Masterson Method, and I'm very curious about that. Reading your bio, I see that you've had an incredible journey with horses. I think it was since like 98 or 99, starting out and working with horses and then venturing into bodywork and having an incredibly successful career. And I am curious for you what that journey was like, specifically when it comes to your creation of the Masterson Method. So for you, what was the soil, the components that sort of developed or inspired that work for you?
Well, that's usually the first question is, how did this happen? And it
Yeah.
just kind of happened on its own, really, because I wasn't really interested in doing any kind of massage therapy on horses or people or anything. I like getting a massage, but that didn't really go much beyond that. But when I was grooming hunter jumpers on the show circuit, I worked for a show barn, and I just noticed the changes in behavior, subtle changes in behavior in the horses. Because anybody who's loves horses loves watching horses, and I just noticed these subtle changes in behavior while therapists were working on the horses, and that's what got me interested in it. It was following the horse, what the horse was saying while they were being worked on, because they communicate by body language. They don't really have a huge vocal repertoire.
Yes.
They have, a neigh, a nicker, a grumble, a snort and a sneeze, that's about it. So it's all body language. And I notice with horses, it's pretty subtle, when they're, around in a paddock or in an area where they're close together, they're noticing everything about what's going on with the other animals. And it just makes sense to me that that's how they survive, is by being super hyper aware of what's going on in their environment. So like if one horse, they're all standing around snoozing, and then the horse on the other side of the paddock lifts his hind foot up a little too fast, then they'll notice it. Like their ear will, so another horse will, their ear will move or something. So that made sense to me. But that's what got me interested in it, was the subtle changes in horses' behavior. And so when I started messing with it, I realized how subtle their sensitivity was too, to touch,
Yeah.
And so they went together, these subtle responses and really light levels of touch kind of went together.
And where did you discover, like, was it sort of along that path where you discovered around traditional Chinese medicine, and then the concept of the bladder meridian? Was
Yeah,
that
so
sort of?
the concept of the bladder meridian, because there's not really, I don't know traditional Chinese medicine, and that's really the only thing that has to do with it, that with the techniques we use. But that had to do with, we were at a horse show in Estes Park, Colorado, and our trainer hired these two ladies to come and massage the horses. Actually, one of them would massage a rider and one would massage the horses. And she started by running her fingers lightly down the bladder meridian, just to relax the horse and connect with the horse, because she obviously knew something about traditional Chinese medicine. So she did that to relax the horse. And I noticed as she was going down this line, that every once in a while the horse would blink, and I could see that the horse was feeling something there. And so I asked her about it, and I asked her to show me how to do it, which she did. And she showed me some other massage things too that I could use on our horses. But that was the one that really stuck with me because it wasn't a lot of work, you know.
Yeah.
It's not like massaging. And all it took was some patience to wait to see what would happen. So when I was running my finger down the bladder meridian, I would watch for, I just noticed that blink. So when the horse blinked, I would just stop there and do nothing. And I
Yep.
might zero in on the blink, like, and this is with no, I call air gap
Yep.
pressure, no
Air
pressure
gapping.
at all, barely
Yep.
touching the hair. And if I found that spot and the horse blinked, then I would just wait there and do nothing and see what happened. And the horse started to like drop its head a tiny bit, and its eye would soften, and it would just, I could tell it was becoming relaxed. And then if I waited long enough, it would drop its head and start to lick and chew. So that's a sign of relaxation. So that was the first connection, that something was happening with the horse, the horse was feeling, and I was just helping it along,
Mm-hmm.
finding where the horse was holding tension.
Mm.
And that's kind of how it got started. The other component to that was a horse chiropractor from New Zealand who used to travel the country and adjust horses, and he'd been doing it for 40 years, and he learned from another old horse chiropractor in New Zealand who'd been doing it for 40 years, and he used very long lever forceful techniques, but he got amazing results. And after he did an adjustment, he would step back to see what the horse had to say, he called it. And if he got a good adjustment, often it was pretty, big adjustment. And he would step back to see what the horse had to say and just wait and see what happened. And one of his signs that he got a good adjustment was the horse would drop its head and it would kind of blink a few times, like his body was trying to figure out what just happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would start to yawn.
Yep.
So that was one of his signs that he got a good adjustment.
Yeah.
And so that really clicked with me, and I followed him around. Whenever he was at a show or where we happened to cross paths, I would, like Lexington or down in Wellington, I would drive him around to the different barns and hold the lead rope.
Yep.
So I was his transportation. So I just learned a lot just watching him, and he didn't teach, he didn't, but he would just, I would ask a few questions and he'd kind of let slip a little, nugget of wisdom or something, and which made sense, and I fit it all together. But then, we have with the Masterson method, we have very light techniques where we just use very little pressure and wait for a response, follow responses of the horse and wait for the horse's nervous system to kind of settle down and release tension. And then we have movement techniques. And the idea behind the movement techniques is when you move a joint or a junction or even a muscle through a range of motion in a relaxed state, meaning when the horse is relaxed, it will release tension in the connective tissue around that joint or junction. So some of the techniques that we do, like lateral cervical flexion, for example, where we go down the neck and gently wiggle our way down the vertebra of the neck. That's when he adjusted, he would adjust the whole atlas and the neck, vertebra of the neck all at once in a huge adjustment, but it used a lot of force, and you had to know what you were doing. And I really wanted to do what he was doing. Fortunately, he wouldn't teach me. So he just said, no, I can't, it wouldn't be practical, and I don't train people, but he's just told me to keep doing what I was doing,
Yep.
And so I took that big, huge adjustment, and I said, well, I can just wiggle my way down the horse's neck.
Yeah.
And if I come to a spot in the neck where the horse is holding tension, it'll brace, physically brace in my hands. And if I soften my hands, he'll unbrace, and then he'll release some of that tension, and then I can move through it. So it was just taking little bits and pieces from different modalities, but rather than doing the modality, I watched or felt what the horse was doing during the process, and realized that you can get the horse to release the tension. And after a time, I realized it's really deep release of tension. It lasts a long time because the nervous system is letting it go.
Yeah.
And I recognize that there's a part of the horse's nervous system that holds on to tension, and there's a part that releases it. And then later on, when I learned bigger words like sympathetic and parasympathetic, that made, oh well, that's that part and that's that part. And so you're allowing the horse's sympathetic to kind of let go, and then the parasympathetic to take over, and that's when it releases the tension. And those responses, the release responses we get, are parasympathetic responses: licking, chewing, yawning, relaxing, shifting weight from leg to leg. All of those are parasympathetic responses. So
absolutely,
that's kind of how it came together. And it wasn't like I was trying to figure something out. It's just that I was grooming and I noticed things, and then I just followed, followed the path and just followed what I was seeing. And that's kind of how it happened. And same with the
Awesome.
business, I didn't start out, I'm going to have an empire, it was like, wow, this works. So I started working on show horses and it got results. And so I could make a living doing that. But then owners wanted to start to learn it because it's very interactive with the horse. And
Yeah.
that's what we're there for. And people wanted to learn it. So I was happy to share it. So I shared it. So
Here we
now
are.
that's what we're doing.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
I want to circle back on a few things there
Sure.
because there's a couple of pieces that I'm super curious about. I mean, the first one, of course, I think that we're talking a lot more about the autonomic nervous system these days, now that we're
Yeah.
more, getting more succinct about and nuanced about, understanding of trauma and understanding of how we regulate and all those things.
Yeah.
You were talking about parasympathetic, sympathetic. I find it really fascinating because, of course, kidney, bladder, meridian in Chinese medicine is the nervous system. So sort of very, very, very connected into that supportive role of the nervous system. Can you share a little bit more about, what you've been noticing about, body work, yes, but also like this work in general? Have you been sort of noticing more and more shifts and changes? Like, for example, a horse that might be have a tendency for anxiety or behavioral issues or,
Yeah.
attentional holding pattern, shall we say, where they're, I see this a lot with horses that and people actually. I do osteopathy, and man, do I see this all the time, this residual tension that people like I'll be working on their arm off the table and I'll like let go of their arm and it'll just stay
Yeah,
in the
right.
air, and I'm like,
we're not even, we
no,
think we're relaxed,
right? And you're like,
we think our arm
oh,
was relaxed, but when you let go of our arm is still up there. Well,
yeah,
not
right. So
entirely
this
relaxed.
kind of like, I think of that as like this, explain to my clients like, hey, so if we thought of it like a 1 out of 10, this like, oh, there's like an 8 out of 10 of like this residual holding pattern in the tissue where it's just all the time there. So
Yeah.
what are you seeing with this work as far as, kind of working with some of those aspects where we bring on more, say, parasympathetic, we sort of
Yeah.
almost are re-patterning the nervous system, so to
Yeah.
speak, with the body work? What are you seeing on that level?
Well, when I started, it was with performance horses, hunter jumpers. So I was working on horses to just get them moving better. They would be restricted in
Yeah.
range of motion somewhere, and then just to release that physical tension and get them moving better. And so that's what the focus was on. But even having that one focus, you could see how different horses were. And some horses, they were all working hard, so they all had physical issues, and some worse than others. And sometimes the physical issues in the body had to do with what was going on in the feet and legs, for example, with show horses. So if they have pain or discomfort in one foot, it'll show up as certain tension patterns in the body. I noticed, well, and also this chiropractor, is one of the things that I asked him that he kind of shared with me. Does he find that there's more tension on one side of the pole, and atlas was a big junction for him.
Yep.
The atlas was so important because anything going on in the body shows up as tension in the pole and atlas, and vice versa if they're tight there. And he said, well, yeah, 9 out of 10 or so, 8 or 9 out of 10, he found were tighter on the right atlas. And then when I started working on more horses, I noticed that there was a diagonal. It would show up in the left hind, the gluteal. So they're kind of compensating for any asymmetry in the body on a diagonal. And they also compensate side to side. But say a horse has a sore right front foot, he's going to get really tight in the right pole and atlas, and the tension on the right atlas. And then in the left gluteal and the sacrum, he'll be tight. So that diagonal. So that would be a physical tension pattern. But then I think your question, it kind of goes beyond that. But when I started working on more horses that weren't just show horses, and especially came up doing seminars and clinics, because then you get all kinds of horses in. Some horses are just like holding on to so much tension. I mean, it's like on the inside.
Oh, yeah.
You can even palpate on the muscles on the outside and they won't say a thing. They're like, the owner will say, oh, this horse is bomb-proof, but it's on the outside. And on the inside, when you do the bladder meridian, just like they just let go, the whole nervous system.
Yeah.
And I would get emails all the time. People would go on YouTube and see the bladder meridian and do it. And they said, I just can't believe that my horse was like this and now he's not. So like physically and fear-wise and trust-wise, and they just let it all go. So something's going on a deeper, I think that's why thought there's a part of the nervous system that protects the body
Yeah.
in the wild. And then, well, not all the time, but in the wild it shows up. They don't want to show signs of weakness or vulnerability, or they become a menu item. They go up on the
Exactly.
menu.
Yep.
And then there's another part that releases it. So when you do that really light work, they can't brace against it. Like when you're searching for a blink and you come across a blink, the blink means they're feeling something, but they're not yet bracing against it. And they can't brace against it because there's no pressure on them. So if you keep their attention on that spot long enough, they'll go from holding on to it to letting it go. And sometimes it just affects the whole body, and that horse that was bomb-proof all of a sudden is just, trusting and sometimes less, behavior-wise, less mouthy.
Yeah.
But I can't make the claim that this is going to fix your horse if he's mouthy or he cribs or something. You just can't. Some horses it'll help, and some horses it won't. But they will, if you stay light enough, long enough, they have to release. It's just whether it's going to stop them from doing some other behavioral issues. That's not, guaranteed.
Have you found any, like, because for me, when you share about that, like I've felt that in horses, many horses, that kind of inner hold and people actually. And immediately I go to the nervous system, immediately I go to like cranial work or something super gentle that again, you can't brace against, because it's like that trying to go in through the tissues. It's just for me, it's like, nope, that's not happening. I could do as much as I could do this all day and I wouldn't get anywhere.
Well, some people have really, really good sense of feel, like you probably do, because if you're an osteopath, you can feel until it gets, through layers of tension, and then you reach a point where I would imagine that you can't go beyond that. And I don't really have that. The more I work on horses, I can feel, I can feel there's hardness under here, without pushing. More here than there. But beyond that, I was following the visual cues from the horse. It's all the visual feedback. And that's what makes it so learnable.
Yeah,
Anybody
love that. You can watch your horse and go, okay, there's a blink, there's a yawn, there's a lick, there's something happening. And what a cool thing. Like I want to commend you on this piece, because how cool to help teach horse people how to observe and listen to their horses. I mean, this is sort of like the side effect of all of this, but I think that I mean, I know growing up and learning about horses, I never learned that stuff. I never learned to kind of watch the subtle cues and watch the ear and watch the eye. And we just, that was not a part of it. Right.
Yeah. The only part you watched was when the ears pinned, watch out.
Like
that
the
was
big,
it. Yeah.
the big F you, right?
Like I even say now, when you go to work on the hind end, because you might work on the front end and it's great, and you'll go back, and if they're extremely sore, and you go to put your thumb under their tail, that I always say, you watch the ears, and if they flatten, that's where you stop, because they'll usually flatten their ear before they kick. They don't want to kick you. They'd rather you stop before that point. So
completely. So my question about the nervous system, so we might call that like a functional freeze, that state where, you can feel on the surface, it's like, okay, they're bomb proof, quote unquote. But there's this functional freeze happening. Have you seen, because I know this is something I've worked with, like any horses that go through a bit of like a thaw out process. So, say the behavior gets worse for a little while, or they actually like have a harder time for a little bit. Is that something that you see at all with this work?
On physically, so physically you can uncover stuff, or you might uncover a lameness that they're protecting, or you're uncovering something that's really physically uncomfortable, and it might take a few days for them to get back their nervous system to process it or get reorganized. So physically, you might see it get worse before it gets better. But like on the trust level, almost always, they're going to trust you more, or they're going to take longer to trust you. You might have to work on them, your own horse, like a longer period of time before they start to really let go. But it's never on that level where they don't trust you more after you do the body work, where they trust you less after you do the body work. I've never seen that ever. So
well, it's so interesting. So one of the things that I have what I learned through my teacher, Dave Collins, was this idea of consent. It was kind of the first time permissions or consent. The first time I'd really thought about that, like at all for me or horses, that was, 20 odd years ago now. For you, or do you see, like, I've only had a few horses ever that have given me like the big no at the beginning of a session, like, we're not doing this, like, that's not happening. Do you see that sometimes? Like,
Oh yeah.
how is that kind of, yeah, how do you teach that to students? Like, what does that look like? What are you looking for in a horse
Right.
that's like not available for the
Yeah.
work,
Yeah, so some horses you'll go to work on, and I'll just use the bladder meridian, for example. You go
Yeah.
to do the bladder meridian, and you'll watch the eye, and then they'll blink, and you can see within like a minute what kind of horse you have. Is it a trusting horse?
Yeah.
Is it a not so trusting horse? Is it very expressive but not expressive? It might be expressive but not trusting, but you can figure out like pretty quickly after doing, a number of horses what they're like. But some horses, they'll just immediately let go, and then that's it. They're letting go, they're releasing, like they're loving all of it. And some horses, you're finding something that they don't want to deal with,
Mm-hmm.
and especially working on performance show horses, they don't want to deal with it. They just want to block it out and get on. That's how they survive. So you'll find something, and you'll see a blink or something, and then you'll stay there. And then before they let go, they'll start to get uncomfortable, like they'll swish their tail
Fidgety.
or pin their ears.
Yep.
Yeah. And so you just wait or soften a little bit, wait with it. But I always looked at it like it's a little kid that doesn't want to go to school. I don't want to go to school. It's just, okay, I know you don't, but we're going to go anyways, and you're going to have a good time. And so I would stay anyways, and then they would release it, and then they'd feel better afterwards. So sometimes you're uncovering stuff that the horse just wants to keep blocked out, and
Mm-hmm.
especially with show horses, because they don't want to feel the pain or the muscle tension, and while they're training or showing or something, and then they go back in the stall or in a paddock, and they just block it out, and they go and eat or graze or something, and you're bringing it up for them, and they don't want to deal with it. So I would ignore that, kind of like, no, we're going to go to school and you'll enjoy it. And then they would release. And of course they're going to feel and move better afterwards. But
Mm-hmm.
there is that little bit. So the consent part, I would acknowledge that they really didn't want to deal with it right now. Some of them did.
Mm-hmm.
I'd acknowledge, I understand, but we're going to just see what happens anyways. So the consent part wasn't like they say no and I say, okay, we'll come back later. It's like, you need to help the horse if you're going to help the horse. And sometimes they don't want to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
But your question is like, how do you know the difference? Like when they absolutely don't want you to touch them, then it's
Mm-hmm.
not the time. You
Yeah.
don't. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I
And
worked on
you,
enough really sore horses to realize that even if they didn't want to be touched, I knew I could get them to feel better. So as I worked on enough, but if they absolutely don't want it, you have to respect that.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. There's only been a few in my career, but it was a pretty
Just a few,
obvious
yeah.
no, where it's like, okay, yeah, this is
It's
not
like a life-threatening no.
totally.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's some horses that are super drama queens, and every time you put your hand up there, they're going to pin their ears and swish and squeal or swish their tail, and you're going to say, "Oh, okay, I know, but we're going to do it anyways." But the real no, like a life-threatening no,
Yeah.
it's life-threatening to them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. It leads me into my next question. I've only got a couple. One of the things I'm really intrigued about with the Masterson method is the air gapping, because
Mhm.
it's rare to see a modality where you're
You
not
don't touch the
necessarily
horse.
needing to touch the horse, right? And I also, like, my other side of things is I do energy work and animal
Uh-huh.
communication and all that. So I'm
Mhm.
really used to it. Like, I work on horses all the time from a distance. But
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, that's an interesting thing to be with. Oh, I don't need to be touching my horse. So
Mhm.
I would love to know for you, like, how do you explain to those clients or those people, like, this is what's happening, this is what is going on, and this is
Yeah.
how it's supportive, especially, like, I'm imagining there's certain horses that are happy with the touch, others that are like, nope, I need a little space. And,
Yeah.
how do you decide and how do you explain that to people as well?
So what we're doing when we're doing that really light touch is we're bringing the horse's awareness to an area that it's been blocking out,
Yeah.
So we're just bringing their awareness to it, and then keeping their attention on it long enough for them to stop guarding it and let it go. So if you're like, for example, some horses are extremely head shy, and they're head shy for a reason, because they're not head shy because they're trained to be head shy, 99% of the time there's tension or discomfort in the poll or in the neck. So you put your hand up there, and before you even get close, you see the horse pull his head away. So that's a horse that's extremely head shy. So it's all kind of looking at it from the outside, not from the inside for me, because I don't really know what's going on in the inside. But you put your hand up and you see the horse starts to pull his head away. If you back your hand slowly away till he relaxes just a tiny bit, and you keep your hand at that distance, you're keeping his attention on that
Yeah.
in a way that he's not bracing. If you keep going closer to you touch him, he's going to be guarding it, like tense like this. But you pull away, back off till you see his eye soften and he blinks. And if you stay there, it's the same thing happens. You don't have to be touching the horse. You're just bringing his attention to it. So, it's not like voodoo or anything. There's always energy work going on. There's energy in everything, but I don't feel anything. I'm just watching the horse. So you just keep his attention on it in a way that he can relax a little bit and keep it there long enough. And then the other thing that helps is with the next full moon, if you slaughter a chicken under the full moon, that helps him.
I guess I deserve that, but
beyond that, there's no voodoo in it at all.
Yeah.
But
it's really, it's
yeah.
helpful to, get that sense, because I love that. Like, I find with when I do my work, like sometimes I'm, really on there, and sometimes it's a part of the palpation quality as well, right? Like, I think that for body workers, but also horse owners, to develop their sense of palpation is really, helpful, essential, even because this is what gives you the nuance of the connection, for whatever reason, whether it's that you're riding or, these sorts of things.
No matter what you're doing.
Right, no matter what you're doing. And I love that when you're coming off the body, that's quite a nuanced palpation to be observing and feeling kind of what's happening there.
Well, a lot of people, I think that they're, and me included, to know what you're feeling under your hand like that. Like when you're talking about palpating. So like, that's a little intimidating for a horse owner, well, how do I know how hard to push or what's really hard and what's comfortable for the horse or safe for the horse? But anybody can see the horse blink.
Yeah.
So, and that's how I learned. I just watched, and because I didn't have any sense of feel as far as, palpating or feeling any kind of energy or vibration or anything. Or, some people do when they're doing the bladder meridian, they'll feel something, and I don't, that's valid. Well, that's what you're feeling. That's what you're feeling. But if you go by what you're seeing, the horse's changes, and the response is any subtle change any change in behavior that correlates with what you're doing with your hand as a response. So for example, you're going down the neck, you get a blink, you're not sure if the horse is just blinking or not, just go back over it. And if you get a blink at the exact same spot, then there's a correlation. And so you have to trust that and then just wait. And so that takes away that intimidating factor of feel, which is intimidating for some people because they're not trained in it. And
do you find that that's a part that grows over time, like as they get this feedback from their horse, that their palpation, quality?
Especially when you start learning the movement technique. So like, I'll just use the lateral cervical flexion as an example, because the goal of that technique is to gently ask for gentle, relaxed movement in each vertebra of the neck as you go down the neck. And you don't even have to know where they are or have your hand on a specific spot. You just have to gently, wiggle your way down the neck. And so the first thing you do is you put your hands in the right place, one hand on the nose, one hand up behind the atlas, and it can be anywhere there. First thing you do is you soften both your hand, you soften yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part for people because like you said, their arm is up. You're holding their arm. And so they're resting their hand on the horse's neck and resting the weight of their arm on their nose and the neck, and they think that's soft, and you have to teach them, okay, we're going to soften even more, no pressure. And then you gently wiggle, and then you soften again, and then you bring the horse's nose around a little more towards you so it's flexing a little farther down, and you soften both hands, and then you slide this hand down. You're focusing the wiggle under your fingers. You're not putting any pressure. So as you wiggle your way and soften down the neck, you start to develop that. If you do the techniques the way you're shown how to do them, you'll develop a sense of feel. And some people naturally have it, and other people don't. They're really heavy-handed because that's the way they handled horses all their life. So it takes them longer to get the feel. But the thing that teaches them the feel is if you're not getting the feel right, the horse isn't responding. So the horse isn't softening, they're bracing and fighting. So the horse is teaching you how to soften just by doing the techniques, how to soften your actual feel.
Yeah, I love that, because I feel like it ties into so many other parts of a relationship with horses, right? It's like how
Yeah.
we are
Yeah.
on the halter,
Yeah, how you lead the horse, how
how we lead
you
the
are.
horse. Yeah.
Yeah.
How we ride, how we are with our bridle and our bit. Like
Mhm.
there's this sort of sense of we're building a connection that's really important, which is watch the behavior, watch the subtle stuff. And
And pretty soon becomes natural.
yeah, yeah,
You can't walk up to a horse without being aware of whether his eye's getting bigger or smaller,
yeah,
or whether he's
totally.
tensing or not. And so you approach the horse at a speed where not like babying them, because I think when you baby a horse, he's wondering what the heck's going on? What are you worried about? So you just go up to them like naturally, but you're watching, if they're getting a little uncomfortable, if you're getting walking up to them too fast, then you just change your pace.
Yeah,
It just starts to happen naturally.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
organically. And
yeah.
we have an instructor one of my early instructors was a dressage trainer and judge. And she said it changed the way she rode her horse. And this is
Hmm.
traditional dressage kind of trainer.
Yeah, I
So
love that. I love that. Well, it would, right? Because that can't, I always think
you
of the
can't
nerve.
unlearn it
You
once
can't
you learn
unlearn
it.
it. It's like it's in your nervous system to
Yeah.
be observant in a different way.
Hmm.
And that shifts your feel, right? Like it
Hmm.
can't help but because you're starting to really have a connection to how is my horse feeling in this moment?
Yeah.
Is there
Yeah.
tension? Is there
Yeah.
relaxation? That sort of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, because like growing up, it's like, how's my horse feeling? Well, he's not running away from me, so I think he's okay.
Right. It was quite blatant, like, oh, well,
Yeah.
he's not at the other end of the field pressing
Yeah.
against the fence, so I guess we're fine, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that added nuance is necessary and great. And yeah, I wanted to continue down that pathway a little bit, and it may be a controversial question, but this is one that I sort of have found a lot is that, or you see a lot out there. So we're going out to work on a horse and the person will say to you, hey, I've had the vet out, they've done all the things, we've ruled out pain. And I
Mhm.
always think, how do you rule out pain? Like this is
Yeah.
an animal that can't talk to you about what they're feeling
Yeah.
and
And that
much
are very good at covering
and
it
are
up because
very
that's how
good
they
at
survive.
concealing
Yeah.
it.
Hmm.
And also for me, when I speak to my human clients, which is like much easier to get feedback about how they're feeling, obviously,
Hmm.
I have
Once you
been
sort out all the other
when she
stuff
sorted out
that's
all
come
the
in with
other
it.
stuff. But what I have found is one of the things that I see often is, say, like neuropathy or pain that's caused by impingement or things like that, which is not necessarily something that you're ever going to see
Hmm.
on a scan or
Hmm.
an X-ray or an ultrasound, or even necessarily pick up in flexion tests or anything like that. So
Hmm.
when we're talking about someone who, a client that's like, oh yeah, like we've ruled out pain. What do you
Hmm.
tend to say or do in that situation?
Well, I think the first thing is that their horse has a problem, and the first question is, have you seen the vet?
Yeah.
Like it's a lameness or it's not quite right. The first thing is to rule out feet and legs, which
Yep.
is usually the first thing that they go to, right? And so that's usually like they've ruled out feet and legs, and then make sure the saddle's fitting and everything. But it's hard to rule out pain, like you said, because they're
Yeah.
so good at covering it up. But the other way around is sometimes you don't even know your horse is sore until he's released it.
Yeah.
So,
Totally. I've
mhm,
seen that so many times where I worked on a mare once. It was wild. She'd gotten herself caught on a fence
mhm,
under her chin, like right
mhm,
under the mandible. And
yeah,
she sliced herself, like right from kind of the top of the jaw down.
mhm.
Amazingly survived, didn't sever the carotid, which is incredible to me. But the scar tissue was something I've never seen.
Oh,
And
yeah,
at the time, it was so interesting because I went in and palpated her like normal, like massage palpation, flexion, kind of flinch tests.
yeah,
And she was like, no flinching.
nothing
And,
there.
but like no flinching, where you're
Oh,
like,
yeah, a little
oh,
excessively not
like no,
flinching.
there's no flinching. And I
Yeah.
thought, that's weird. And as we worked on the scar tissue, all of a sudden, it's like her back started lighting up.
Oh,
But,
mhm,
understandably, she'd had all of this holding and brace to try
mhm,
to protect these vessels and this really key area.
Yeah.
And it was amazing as that opened up. It was like, okay, like she's really feeling a lot. It's just
Yeah.
been locked down, right? Like
Mhm.
because this is how she survived this literally like,
Mhm.
almost life-ending event essentially,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think, yeah, and I think horses see a lot of things as life-threatening events
Yeah.
or like that, so, and they just learn to block it out. So, yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. So all of a sudden the horse is feeling stuff. And especially starting up there,
Mm.
because that's like where everything starts. If that's really, she's blocked out up there around
Yep.
the pole and the atlas, then the rest of the body's gonna possibly, nothing's for sure, but I would think that that would affect the rest of the body, you know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's interesting in osteopathy because one of the things is like the rule of the artery is absolute. So it's like vessels, right? It's all about
Mhm.
vessels and the brace. And
Mhm.
I found that so fascinating. Like now kind of reflecting back on her case, I was like, huh, okay, the body was really doing its best to make sure she was going to be okay, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Because they
yeah.
don't have any a choice. They
Yep.
really don't have any choice. They can't complain. If they complain, it's usually it's a behavioral, a training
Yep.
issue because they're complaining. So they have no choice in the wild as wild animals. They just have to block it out and get on with it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Oh, I I saw that you have a workshop coming up with Mark Rashid, and I'm imagining you do a few of these. So now that you're
Oh
talking about
yeah.
training and body work, I just
Mhm.
can't help but ask. I think this combo is again
Mhm.
essential. What do you find when you're kind of working together in a space like that with
Yeah.
someone who's focusing on more of the training side, but has an understanding of the body work, and then you're kind of pulling your piece in. What are you
Mhm.
seeing as far as that
Yeah,
union or
that's
that
kind
work
of what
together?
it's kind of what it's all about because when I first met him, he said that as much as like 30 to 50% of people that would come to him with an issue, a training issue, he has a really good eye for seeing where the horse might not be moving,
Yep,
there's something not going on correctly in the horse, and he would say, you have to go, this is a physical issue, and you have to go have it taken care of before, I'll give you a lesson. So he was sending away a lot of people because he recognized that the horse can put up with a lot of pain. If you're a really quote unquote good trainer, you can train the horse to deal with a lot of discomfort. And so he wouldn't go there. So he used to work with a horse chiropractor in his clinics who retired. And so when we got together, his wife Chrissy said, "Hey, what?" Not when we met each other and we were talking about the
yeah,
similarities between his training and this body work. Chrissy said, "Why don't you do clinics together?" And so we thought, "Oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea." So we have like three riders will come in the morning,
yep,
one after the other. They each have an hour, like a normal lesson. But what we do is we find out what the rider wants to work on, and then we watch the horse move. And then and I've learned a lot from him about watching, seeing where there might be a restriction in movement in the horse or bracing,
yep,
because I didn't watch his horses move. I just went in and get a list from the trainer, go down and work on them all.
yeah,
And so I learn a lot, or I have learned a lot and still learn at these clinics. We're doing clinics with him. Plus I get paid, so it's even better. But
fantastic.
but anyway, so the rider will come in, we'll find out what they want to work on. Then we'll watch the horse move and see where there might be restriction in the body or indications that the horse is either uncomfortable doing what you're asking, like because of physical discomfort, or just can't move there anymore. And that fits in with the way I look at the horse. You have pain and you have restriction, and I look at them as two different things. So if a horse is sore, say you have a saddle that's not fitting, and you put it on the horse and then you ride it and you take the saddle off and you palpate the back, and the horse
Yep,
reacts. It's sore there. So if you keep using that saddle, pretty soon the horses it's going to tighten up in the back,
yep,
and you're going to get a reaction when you palpate. Plus, the back's going to start locking up, not moving, right? Eventually, if you keep using that saddle, you can palpate as hard as you want, and there will be no reaction, no pain, but it's just restricted. It's just
yep,
not moving. So I that distinction is important to me because if there's pain somewhere, whatever's causing it is happening right now. It's still going on. And if there's no pain, it's just restricted and there's no reaction, then it's either a chronic issue or an older
mm-hmm,
issue. So
mm-hmm,
that helps you kind of find out what's causing. It's more information for you
yeah,
to determine what might be causing what we're finding in
mm,
the body. Not being an osteopath and having a lot of other tools at my disposal, that I'm just, using the basics.
yeah,
So, and sometimes the horse just isn't physically able to bend, for example, and there's no pain, that just can't go. But sometimes there's pain, and that they're bracing against, and that's why there's no movement. But anyways, the rider comes in. The auditors get the best deal because they will, we do 3 horses a day,
Yeah.
and we think out loud. We're just thinking about loud what we're seeing. We're not saying, oh, there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
We're seeing that I'm seeing that this horse isn't moving quite as well in his upper neck on the left here, or I'm seeing that the hind end, there's a little asymmetry or something. So we're just thinking out loud and not being judgmental, saying this is wrong or this is wrong. This is just what we're seeing. So we're thinking out loud, and then the auditors get the benefit of all these different horses and what we think about them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then I'll work on the horses, and then the next day they'll come back again and do the lesson, and we'll see if there's any change. And then I'll talk about what I found that might correlate with what we were seeing. So it's always an experiment.
Oh, it's great.
But that's what we do, because he just wouldn't train people. He wouldn't give lessons to people whose horses were in discomfort.
I mean,
And
go Mark. I
yeah.
commend that, because the number of clinics I've seen where it's like a lame horse walks into the clinic
Oh
and then they
yeah.
go through a lesson, and I'm like, what's
Oh
happening
yeah.
here?
Or
Like,
he won't stay on the right canter lead. Well, I can fix that.
yeah,
We'll make
yeah,
him do it. And
yeah.
if he's not staying on the right canter lead, he didn't just decide, that I'm not going to do right canter leads anymore, or,
There's
you
trouble
know,
going on. Yeah,
yeah, there's something going on. And
yeah,
if something's going on one direction that's not going on the other direction, that's one of the big signs that there's something physical going on.
yeah.
Like, they didn't all get together last night and say, "Hey, let's all not bend to the right today."
Right.
They don't do that.
No, no, it's not thought out like that. I
Yeah.
love that. I think that, ethically speaking, those are
Hmm.
the kind of, how would we say, like the standards that we need to set, where it's
Hmm.
like, okay, let's examine this or look at this more deeply,
Hmm.
because there is obviously something going on here. So
Yeah.
I'm really, really heartened to hear
Yeah.
that's what you two
I
are
always think
up
of that
to.
Gary Larson cartoon, The Far Side, Gary Larson, the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
cartoonist. Like, there's some cows standing around I don't know, there's 3 cows standing there, and they're leaning on a fence post, and they're chatting, and one's smoking a cigarette. And then one of them yells, "Car," and they all get down and graze. And then the car goes by, and then after the car goes by, they don't do that. They don't. We're all gonna just not bend to the right tomorrow.
Hey guys, what do you think of this plan? Yeah,
Yeah,
for
let's try
sure.
this.
For sure. We're coming to the end of our time together, but I am currently obsessed with horse keeping. So I wanted
Mhm.
to ask you about your sense of how much environment and sort of the ways that our horses are kept are influencing them, say on a physical level, on a bodywork level. What do
Mhm.
you see as a correlation there for, in terms of the horses you see
Yeah.
and the ways that they're kept, whether it's like freedom, forage, if they have friends, if there's, they have
Yeah.
space to move. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and people are becoming more and more aware of this, which is really nice, but they need to move, right?
Yeah.
Horses need to move. They're herd animals, they're not solitary animals. So, I mean, I see a lot of horses that are alone that appear to be okay. They they kind of get used to it, but they do like to have. But I think the bigger thing is space to move around, and the horses that are stalled all the time. I think that's like hard on their nervous system, and it's
Oh, yeah.
and show horses, they're on the road a lot, and they're ridden, or exercised an hour a day, and then they're bathed to within an inch of their life, and then they're put back in the stall, and then that's it. So, and they're just standing there, and their feet get really, really sore, and their bodies, they'll get out and do their job, but they're just, I don't know that they're the healthiest they could be. So turnout is a big thing. Feed's a hard one, because I had a mare who was insulin resistant, and I live in Iowa, and in spring and fall, especially
Yeah.
spring, I would prefer that they just be out all the time grazing, but it was a real battle to kind of find a balance between letting her be out
Yep.
and keeping her from getting laminitic,
Yep.
you know.
Yep. For sure.
So, when we have them in our environment and not in their natural environment, there's compromises that we have to make sometimes. And like in her case, I just couldn't let her out to free graze all day, because she would
Yep.
be within a few days lamanitic in the springtime.
Yeah.
But then in the summertime, when the grass was nibbled down, and I try to manage their pasture so that it would stay nibbled down,
Yeah.
it would still grow a little bit, but it wouldn't grow fast enough that they could gorge themselves on it.
Yeah.
That I could leave them out most of the year.
Yeah.
But I guess my point is you just can't like say in a blanket statement they need to be out all the time, because I know for a fact that Annabelle, wouldn't have lived as long if she was out.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah. I'm getting more and more into track systems. So that's because I have my one mare is
Mhm.
now 25 and my other
Mhm.
mare is quite sugar sensitive. So I've found that
Mhm.
to be a fantastic kind of in between where they can
You mean where
still
you build a track around the?
exactly,
Yeah,
like
I
the
did
outside,
eventually. Yeah,
yeah,
I
the
did that with
perimeter
her.
track. And then what
Mhm.
happens is it basically goes to, it gets to dirt
Yeah.
because they
Hmm.
just move on it so much. But I have found it the best way to keep my girls moving.
Yeah,
And I only have like an
I
acre and a
agree.
half where they are, but yeah, so then they get grazing when mom says. And
Yeah,
yeah, so
yeah.
that seems to be a good way to kind of like a happy medium
The
between
happy medium. Yeah.
like having to be in all the time and like
Hmm.
going out to graze. It's like, okay, now you can
Hmm.
still move, but there's not a lot
Yeah.
of access to forage that might get you
Yeah.
in trouble. So okay,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think our pasture was about the part they were on is maybe 4 or 5 acres.
Yep.
And it was I would use electric, those little
Yep.
fiberglass poles with the
Totally.
electric rope. So I could widen the
Yep.
pathway when like it was down to dirt. I could widen it a little bit,
Yep.
and then they would have a little more to nibble on. But
I love
just to
that.
have them moving around was super helpful.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think as a body worker, I found that over time I'm like, oh, this is like such a big piece of, like I don't want to keep going in and kind of working on the same thing every time, right? Like, and
Mhm.
oftentimes when you're working with horses that are living in stalls and aren't really
Mhm.
getting a lot of movement and enrichment, like that
Yeah.
becomes like you're just kind of doing the same thing. So it felt like, okay, this is a kind of a nice piece to work with where we can actually like as body workers get better results even, down the
Yeah.
line as
And you
horses
and
are.
you and you start if you do like you're doing the bladder meridian on your horse, or
Yeah.
even just that. It's not just the bladder meridian. You can do this anywhere on the horse's body. It's just
Yeah.
that bladder meridian gives you a pathway to follow, but you can do it anywhere. And you can start to, tell when things are showing up or not showing up with some horses.
I love that.
Um, but you're just being more aware of your horse's well-being when you're
Yeah.
paying closer attention like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Amazing. I think that there's something to be said, well, so much to be said for catching things early, right? So this
Yes.
sense of
Mhm.
like something like the bladder meridian or doing this work on your horse, it lets
Mhm.
you read like you were just mentioning. It's like you
Yeah.
you catch and read things earlier that are
I could just
maybe
sometimes tell when Annabelle was uncomfortable,
yeah,
and she wouldn't even respond to the bladder meridian
yeah.
hardly. And it's hard to work on your own. Some people, for
Oh,
me,
it
it's hard
is.
to work on your own horses. They know you too well,
Yeah.
and if you have any agenda with this method, if you have any agenda or plan, like I know what I'm going to do now,
Yeah.
they pick up on it and they'll guard again, internally brace against it. So you have to go in with no agenda.
It's hard
But
to do with your own horses.
oh yeah, she just passed away this fall, but I have her and her brother, their brother and sister, and I had even resorted to I put him in the cross ties here and her in the cross ties here, and I'd work on her and watch him to see if he would give me some responses because they both were so stoic with me, and
Oh,
and fortunately at the time I was teaching here at home and I had students work on
yep.
them because they
Good.
got a lot better results than
Yeah.
I did. But back to the part about asking permission of the horse, I never really, I always, like I said, I'd say, okay, I know you may not want this right now, but, we'll proceed with caution. And anytime you run into resistance with the movement techniques, you
Yep.
soften. So
Yep.
if you reach a point where, they brace every time, they're telling you that's all for now. You might come back tomorrow and be
Yep.
able to wiggle through that part, but they're saying not now. So that's kind of a built-in safety thing. Whenever you run into resistance, you soften. Then when they soften, you keep moving. And if they don't soften, then their nervous system isn't. It's not time for
Yeah.
them to. But anyways, so now that Annabelle's gone, her brother Jeremiah, I go out in the pasture now, and he really could have cared less whether I worked on him at all. Annabelle we had more of a connection, but now that she's gone, I'll go out, and before he never wanted me to work on him at all, but
Yeah.
I always had an agenda. Even if I was doing the
Mm,
lights, the bladder meridian, but now we have a relationship where I go out and I have no agenda and I feed him in the morning and I'll sit and have coffee with him. My wife feeds him usually, but when I go out and feed him, or even I'll go out after she feeds and I'll sit and spend time with him and let her do all the work. But now when I'm sitting there, I'll just start lightly doing
yeah.
something on him. I'll just be drawn to his hind end and go to the sacrum area and I'll just gently, gently, really gently. And if he takes a step away, then I'm okay with that. And then now more and more he doesn't walk away because I had an agenda before. And if you have any
Yeah.
agenda, that's not asking permission when you have an agenda. When you have no agenda, they're saying not now, then you respect it.
I love
So
that. Yeah, one of the terms I use for that is neutrality. It's like you're actually there for the right reasons, which is helping your
mhm.
horse out, right? You're listening
Yeah,
to what they're wanting, and yeah, sometimes
yeah.
working on your own horse, what I found was my neutrality scale was a lot closer to me than them. So
Yeah.
that was a part of the
You're
work was like, okay, we just got to shuffle this along.
yeah,
So we're
you're like the
actually
client who's still holding the arm up.
exactly, right? Like I want something from this. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, no, like what does the horse what's happening for
Yeah, what
them?
what are you saying
Mm,
about this?
yeah.
Like really.
Yeah.
And the litmus test is if they don't want you to do it. If you want to work on them without any halter or anything, if they're walking away,
Yeah.
it's because you have an agenda.
Totally. Yeah.
So
I,
they'll tell you if you have no agenda.
I love
But
that. I
you
think it's my
really have to have the space and the patience and the time to do that, to
yeah.
have no agenda with them.
Mm,
Mm.
mm. It feels as well. I don't know about you. It sounds like it, but like I prefer to work with them free if I
Hmm.
can because of
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Because they're like, yeah,
Yeah, I prefer to work on my horse when he's free because otherwise he won't let me anyway.
right?
So, but when you're working on other people's horses, it's a different story because you're there to help the horse.
Yeah.
You're there at that time and that place, and you have to kind of say, no, we're gonna keep going, but you know when to stop.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Amazing. Well, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you today. I know one of your missions, reading on your website, is to have every horse in the world experience the bladder meridian technique. I know that it's both on your website and
Mhm.
on YouTube. Can you
Yeah.
share how people can find you, Jim?
Well, yeah, on YouTube, we have a Masterson Method channel, but just search the bladder meridian on YouTube and you can learn how to do it. Or on our website, somewhere on there, we have a 15-minute video on how to do the bladder meridian and all the I like to teach like what ifs, like when you're doing anything
Yep.
that you're learning from us, like, well, what if the horse, pulls his braces, or what if the horse,
Yeah.
pulls his leg out of your hand or something. So it's not just how to do the bladder meridian, it's, what to watch for. And well, that's another thing. When you're working on the pole and atlas, you might see something going on behind that tells you something's going on up here, like
Yep.
when they release tension in the atlas, for some reason, the atlas and the sacrum are connected,
Oh,
by
yeah.
that. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
by that 1,200 pounds of horse in between.
Yep.
But when they release up here, you'll see them relax the leg behind. Or when you're working in the lower neck area, for some reason down in here, if they feel something going on up in the groin, they'll stomp their foot. So there's fascial connections
Fascial
between,
connections. Yep.
the hyoid and the sternum and all the way up into the groin. So
Yeah.
so when you're working in that area, you see something going on over there, it means something. So it's not just how to do the bladder meridian, but just watch the whole horse, not just watch the eye. Um,
Amazing. Yeah.
but
And
yeah,
your website, Jim, is
mastersonmethod.com
mastersonmethod.com. So we
made
can,
everything easy to
I
remember.
love it. That works great. That works great. So
Yeah.
head over there if you want
Oh, and the
to.
other thing about the bladder
Yeah.
meridian, you can't do it wrong.
Oh,
I
perfect.
mean, you can't hurt the horse. You can
Yeah.
always do it better, but you can't do it wrong. You just have to have the patience to wait and really know what no pressure means
Yeah.
barely touching the hair, and then trust that it's working. Those three things.
Incredible. So something that anybody can do and learn.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
wonderful. That's
Yeah.
that's great. So thank you again, Jim, for being here today. It's so
You're welcome.
appreciated. Yeah. Yeah, and want to thank everybody listening. Hope you
For their
learned,
patience.
yeah, for your patience, for your concentration, and
Mhm.
I hope you learned a thing or two today from this conversation, and we'll see you all next time. Bye for now.